She gave up her children because she couldn't afford to raise them. 23 years later, they found her, and Dorothy Campbell wiped the sweat from her brow as she flipped another portion of meat on the hot griddle of her food cart. It was an ordinary Tuesday morning in downtown Charlotte, with the typical bustle of people heading to work. She had no idea that this would be the day that would change her life forever. Across the street, 3 men in suits watched her every move with an intensity she hadn't yet noticed. The tallest one, in a navy blue jacket, held a crumpled paper in his trembling hands. The other 2, one in a grey suit and the other in white, stood silently beside him, their expressions a mix of anxiety and determination. Dorothy seasoned the meat and called out to the next person in line, "Next! Come on up! Got a hot sandwich ready!" Business was good that morning. Since she had gotten the permit to work at that spot 3 months ago, she had been building a loyal clientele. Construction workers, employees from nearby offices, and students from the private college on the corner already knew the unique flavor of the seasoning she prepared at home. "Miss, do you have change for 50?" asked a young man in a yellow helmet. "Yes, I do, honey. I always try to have change so I don't inconvenience my customers." Dorothy smiled as she handed over the sandwich. At 52, she had learned that friendliness was a fundamental part of the business. Every satisfied customer meant the possibility of them returning the next day, and she needed every dollar to pay the rent for the studio apartment where she lived. Across the street, the man in the blue suit took a step forward. "It's her," he whispered to the other 2. "I'm absolutely certain." "How can you be so sure after so many years?" replied the one in the grey suit nervously. "I remember her face, I never forgot. Even with the wrinkles and grey hair, I recognized the eyes." The third man in the white suit took a deep breath. "Then let's go. We can't stand here forever." Dorothy was preparing another sandwich when she noticed 3 men crossing the street toward her. Something about their demeanor made her slightly uncomfortable. They didn't look like regular customers. The expensive suits and the way they walked together, determined, made her stomach tighten for no apparent reason. "Excuse me," said the tallest one, reaching the cart. "Are you Dorothy Campbell?" She stopped moving the meat on the griddle and looked at them carefully. The man who had spoken was in his early 20s, with neatly cut dark hair and brown eyes that seemed familiar in some strange way. "Who wants to know?" she replied cautiously. "Please, it's very important. Did you work for the Wellington family household in the 2000s? Dorothy's blood seemed to freeze in her veins. It had been over 20 years since anyone mentioned that name in front of her. She felt her hands begin to tremble and almost dropped the spatula. I don't know what you're talking about." "Ma'am," insisted the man in the grey suit, "we know you are our mother." The words hit Dorothy like a punch to the stomach. She let out a low moan and leaned on the cart to keep from falling. The 3 men in front of her had faces she had tried to forget for more than 2 decades, but which had remained etched in her memory like a wound that never fully healed. You can't be," she stammered. "We're Brandon, Kenneth, and Tyler," said the youngest in the white suit. "Your sons." Dorothy felt the world spin around her. The griddle kept heating up. The street traffic continued as normal, but for her, everything had stopped. 23 years of pain, guilt, and longing surfaced in a single devastating moment. "No, you're mistaken. I'm not—" she managed to stammer before her legs gave way. Brandon, the oldest, reached out to support her. "Please don't deny it. We've searched for so long." "I am nobody's mother," shouted Dorothy, causing a few customers to turn in surprise. "You have the wrong person." She quickly turned off the hot plate and began pushing the cart, trying to get away as fast as possible. Her hands trembled so much she could barely hold the equipment properly. "Mom, wait!" shouted Kenneth, running after her. "We just want to talk." "I am not your mother," Dorothy yelled again without turning around. "Leave me alone." She managed to push the cart for almost 2 blocks before stopping, breathless and in tears. She leaned against the wall of an empty building and began to cry uncontrollably. The 3 men had followed at a respectful distance, but were still there. Tyler approached slowly. "Mrs. Dorothy, we understand this must be a shock." "You don't understand anything," she sobbed. "Anything? We understand more than you might think," replied Brandon gently. We know you worked for Mrs. Constance Wellington. We know we were babies when we were separated." Dorothy raised her tear-swollen eyes to look at them. For the first time, she really looked at the faces of the three men. Brandon had the same brown eyes she saw in the mirror every day. Kenneth had the same stubborn chin as their father. Tyler smiled sideways, exactly like she did when she was nervous. "How did you find me?" she asked in a weak voice. "We hired a private investigator," explained Kenneth. "It took 2 years, but he managed to trace your path from when you left the Wellington house." Dorothy closed her eyes and rested her head against the cold wall of the building. 23 years trying to forget, 23 years trying to rebuild a life after the greatest loss a woman can suffer, and now they were there in front of her, grown and well-dressed. "You shouldn't have come," she murmured. "You have a mother, a real mother who took care of you, who gave you an education, who—" "Mrs. Constance is not our mother," interrupted Tyler. "She is our adoptive grandmother. We always knew we were adopted. And we always wanted to find you," added Brandon. "We always wanted to understand what happened." Dorothy opened her eyes and saw that small crowds had formed around them. People passed by and looked curiously at the strange scene. She felt exposed and vulnerable. I can't talk about this here on the street," she said quietly. "People are staring." "Then let's go somewhere else," suggested Kenneth. "We can go for coffee, talk calmly." "No!" exclaimed Dorothy. "You don't understand. I can't be with you. Not after what happened." She pushed the cart again, more slowly this time, but still trying to get away. The three followed her in silence for a few more blocks, until she stopped in front of an old residential building. "This is where I live," she said without looking at them. "Please, go away and leave me alone." "We can't do that," replied Brandon. "Not after searching for so long." 23 years, Mum," said Tyler, and the word Mom made Dorothy shudder. 23 years not knowing where we came from, who we were before the Wellingtons. Dorothy was climbing the entrance steps when she turned around. "You want to know who you were? You were the children of a stupid maid who didn't know how to take care of you. That's what you were. A maid who agreed to give up her own children because she couldn't provide for them. Now you know you can go." "Mom," began Kenneth. "I am nobody's mother," shouted Dorothy one last time before entering the building and slamming the door. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. Dorothy climbed the 3 flights of stairs to her studio apartment on shaky legs. She opened the door and collapsed into the only armchair she had, an old piece of furniture she'd bought from a thrift store. The tears came back with full force. For 23 years, she had built a routine that kept her sane. She woke up at 5 in the morning, prepared the seasonings for the food cart, went out to work until 5 in the afternoon, returned home, took a shower, watched television, and went to sleep. On weekends, she cleaned the house and went to the market. A simple life, without surprises, without pains too great to bear. And now they had appeared. Her boys. Her babies. Dorothy got up and went to the small closet in the bedroom. At the back, behind her work clothes, was an old shoebox. She took it out with trembling hands and sat on the bed. Inside the box were 3 small hospital bracelets, each with a name handwritten on it: Brandon, Kenneth, and Tyler. The only things left from the 9 happiest months and the 3 most painful years of her life. She held the bracelets to her chest and let the memory take her back. It was 2001 when she found out she was pregnant with triplets. She was only 29 and worked as a housekeeper for Mrs. Constance Wellington, a wealthy widow from Charlotte who lived alone in a mansion in the Myers Park neighborhood. The children's father was Derek, a construction worker she met on a site near the Wellington house. They dated for 6 months, but when Dorothy told him about the pregnancy, he disappeared without a trace. She never heard from him again. Mrs. Constance had reacted strangely when she learned of the pregnancy. At first, she showed an almost maternal concern, offering medical help and promising that Dorothy could continue living in the servants' quarters until the children were born. "Don't you worry, dear," Mrs. Constance would say. "We'll take care of everything. You and the babies will be just fine." Dorothy remembered the gratitude she felt back then. Mrs. Constance paid for a private health plan, attended every doctor's appointment, and even decorated a room in the main house for the babies. "They'll stay here with me until you get settled," she always explained. "A single mother with 3 babies needs help." But as the weeks passed, Dorothy began to notice strange things. Mrs. Constance was buying too many clothes for the babies, expensive furniture, imported toys. She spoke of the children as if they were her own. "My grandchildren will have the best of everything," she would say on the phone to her friends. "I'll finally have a real family." Dorothy tried to talk a few times about her plans to find her own place to raise the children, but Mrs. Constance would always change the subject or create some urgency that interrupted the conversation. The delivery was difficult. 3 consecutive C-sections left Dorothy very weak. She was hospitalized for a week, and when she returned home, she realized Mrs. Constance had registered the babies with the last name Wellington. "It was just to make things easier at the hospital," she explained quickly. "We can change it later." But as the days went by, Dorothy realized she was being gradually pushed away from her own children. Mrs. Constance hired 3 specialized nannies and said Dorothy needed to rest. "You're still recovering from childbirth, dear. Let the professionals take care of the babies for now." Dorothy remembered how she protested, how she tried to argue that she wanted to breastfeed, change diapers, care for her children. But Mrs. Constance always had a ready answer. "The nannies know best how to do it. You can visit whenever you want, but you need to understand they're better off with professional care." They were agonizing months. Dorothy lived in the same house as her children, but was treated like a stranger. She watched the babies grow from a distance, being raised by other people, calling the nannies by the affectionate name that should have been hers. The situation became unbearable when the boys turned 8 months old. Dorothy had tried several times to talk seriously with Mrs. Constance about leaving the house and taking the children, but always met resistance. It was then that Mrs. Constance made the proposal that would change her life forever. "Dorothy, dear, we need to talk," she said one Saturday afternoon. "Sit here with me." They were in the main living room of the mansion, the one where Dorothy never felt comfortable because she knew she didn't belong to that world. "I've been thinking about the boys' situation," began Mrs. Constance. "You're young, you have your whole life ahead of you. You could remarry, have other children." Dorothy felt a chill in her stomach. "What are you trying to say?" "I'm saying that perhaps it would be better for everyone if I officially took care of the boys. You can visit them whenever you want, but they would stay with me permanently." "Mrs. Constance, they are my children." "And you are an excellent mother, dear. But think about it. What kind of life can you offer 3 children? You earn minimum wage, don't own a home, don't have family who can help." Mrs. Constance spoke with a cruel calm that Dorothy remembered to this day. "With me, they will have an education in private schools, language courses, trips abroad. They will have all the opportunities you would like to give them, but can't." "But they are my children," repeated Dorothy, her voice weaker. "And they always will be. No one is taking that away from you. I'm offering them a better life." Mrs. Constance showed papers she had prepared, temporary custody documents, claiming Dorothy needed time to get financially stable. "It's only temporary," she insisted, "until you get into a better situation." Dorothy remembered how confused she was at that time. 8 months after giving birth, she still felt physically and emotionally fragile. She saw her children being cared for by specialized nannies, sleeping in expensive cribs, wearing designer clothes. And she also saw her own situation, without money, without a home, without family, without the children's father. "If I sign this, can I see them always?" she asked. "Whenever you want, dear. They will stay here. You'll continue to see them grow up." Dorothy closed her eyes there in the small apartment, holding the hospital bracelets. How naive she had been. How she believed the promises of a woman who only wanted grandchildren to call her own. She signed the papers on a Tuesday morning, exactly 23 years ago. Mrs. Constance promised it was temporary, that in a few years Dorothy could regain custody when she was more stable. But the weeks passed, and Dorothy realized she was being subtly pushed away from the house. First, Mrs. Constance suggested she look for work elsewhere to gain experience and increase her market value. Then, she arranged a position for Dorothy with a family in another neighborhood. "It's a wonderful opportunity, dear, and you can visit the boys on weekends." Dorothy accepted because she needed to work and because she believed it would be temporary. But the weekend visits became less frequent. Mrs. Constance always had an excuse. The children had a cold, had a doctor's appointment, were too restless. 6 months after signing the papers, Dorothy only saw her children once a month. A year later, only on special occasions like birthdays and Christmas. 2 years later, Mrs. Constance changed her phone number and address without notice. Dorothy spent 3 years desperately searching for her children. She hired a cheap lawyer who told her the papers she had signed gave full custody to Mrs. Constance. They weren't temporary, as they had promised. She tried to file a lawsuit but didn't have the money to cover the costs of a long legal battle. The lawyer explained it would be almost impossible to prove she had been deceived, especially considering she had signed the documents voluntarily. Dorothy searched for the Wellington family by every possible means. She combed through affluent neighborhoods, asked at private schools, tried to find former household staff. But Mrs. Constance had disappeared with the 3 boys as if they had never existed. The depression that followed was devastating. Dorothy lost several jobs for constantly missing work or being unable to concentrate on tasks. She developed problems with alcohol and even spent a few months on the street. It was only at 40, almost 10 years after losing her children, that she managed to stabilize herself minimally. She stopped drinking with the help of a support group, got a steady job cleaning offices, and rented the studio apartment where she lived to this day. Dorothy opened her eyes and looked around the small apartment. A simple life, but a dignified one. She had managed to rebuild something after complete devastation. And now they were back. She got up and went to the window. Down there on the street, the 3 men were leaning against a black car, clearly waiting for her to come down or give some sign. How did they have the nerve to come back? How did they have the nerve to look for her after everything that had happened? Didn't they understand she had lost the right to be a mother the moment she signed those cursed papers? Dorothy closed the curtains and went back to the armchair. She wasn't going down. She wasn't going to talk to them. She wasn't going to open wounds that had taken decades to heal. But even with the curtains closed, she knew they were there. And for the first time in 23 years, the routine that kept her sane was completely destroyed. In the car, the 3 brothers argued about what to do. "She's clearly in shock," said Brandon. "We need to give her time to process." "But if we leave now, she might disappear again," argued Kenneth. "It took us 2 years to find her." "What if she really doesn't want to see us?" asked Tyler. "What if she actually prefers we stay away?" Brandon looked at the building Dorothy had entered. "Did you see her face when she recognized us? It wasn't anger or indifference. It was pain, a very deep pain." "That's exactly why we need to insist," said Kenneth. "Something happened that she can't talk about." "Or something she feels too guilty to talk about," added Tyler. The 3 fell silent for a few minutes, each lost in their own thoughts. They had grown up knowing they were adopted. Mrs. Constance had never hidden that from them, but always told the same version. A very young, single mother who couldn't afford to raise 3 children and asked her to take care of them. "Grandma always said our biological mother was very young and irresponsible," Kenneth recalled, "but that woman doesn't seem irresponsible. And she doesn't seem like someone who abandoned her children because she didn't want them," added Brandon. The pain in her eyes, it was of someone who lost something very important. Tyler sighed. "So what do we do? Stay here waiting for her to come down?" "Let's come back tomorrow," Brandon decided. "Every day, if necessary, until she agrees to talk to us." "What if she moves?" asked Kenneth. "Then we'll look again," Brandon replied with determination. "We didn't give up for 2 years, we're not giving up now." They left, but not before Brandon wrote down the exact address and took a photo of the front of the building. The next day, they returned at the same time. Dorothy didn't come down. She saw them from the window, parked in the same spot, and decided not to leave the house. She called the man she rented the snack cart from and said she was sick. On the second day they came back. Dorothy still didn't go out. On the third day she was out of money and had no food at home. She needed to work. She left the house at 5 in the morning, hoping they wouldn't be there so early. They were. "Mom!" shouted Tyler when he saw her leaving the building. Dorothy pretended not to hear and walked quickly in the opposite direction from where she kept her cart. They followed her on foot as she caught a bus to another neighborhood. For an entire week, this pattern repeated. Dorothy would change her work location, they would find her the next day. It was as if they had unlimited resources of time and money to look for her. "Why won't you leave me alone?" she shouted one Friday morning, when she couldn't stand pretending not to see them anymore. "Because we're your family," Kenneth replied simply. "You have a family that took care of you, that gave you an education, that—" "That lied to us," interrupted Brandon. Dorothy stopped arranging the cart and looked at him. "What?" "Mrs. Constance lied to us about you," explained Tyler. "For years she said our mother was very young, irresponsible, that she abandoned us because she didn't want the responsibility." "But you don't seem like that at all," continued Kenneth. "You work hard, you have an organized life. And most of all, the pain in your eyes isn't from someone who abandoned children because she didn't want them. It's from someone who lost children against her will." Dorothy felt her legs weaken. They knew. Somehow they knew something was wrong with Mrs. Constance's version. "You don't understand the situation," she managed to say. "I couldn't afford to raise 3 children. Mrs. Constance offered a better life for you." "Offered or imposed?" asked Brandon directly. The question hit Dorothy like a slap. She leaned on the cart and took a deep breath. How could they know? How could they see the truth just by looking at her? I need to work," she murmured. "People are depending on the food." "Then work," said Kenneth. "We'll stay here. We're not leaving until you talk to us for real." Dorothy looked around and saw there were already some people waiting for food. She couldn't cause more scenes in public. She couldn't lose more days of work. Resigned, she turned on the stove and started preparing the sandwiches. The 3 men sat on a nearby bench and watched in silence. All morning, they stayed there. They didn't try to talk to her, didn't bother her, just watched. Dorothy felt extremely uncomfortable, but gradually she began to notice things. Brandon tilted his head the same way when he was thoughtful. Kenneth gestured with his hands the same way she did. Tyler had a small scar on his eyebrow that she remembered from when he was a baby. They really were her sons. Her babies grown up, turned into successful and determined men. During the lunch break, when the crowd thinned, Dorothy approached the bench where they were. "Are you going to stay there all day?" she asked. "If necessary," replied Brandon. "People are looking, they're talking." "Then talk with us," said Kenneth. 5 minutes, that's all we ask." Dorothy looked around. Indeed, some people were commenting about the 3 well-dressed men spending the whole day watching the woman with the food cart. 5 minutes, she agreed reluctantly. "But right here, on the bench, and then you leave." They agreed immediately. Dorothy sat at the edge of the bench, keeping as much distance as possible. "What do you want to know?" she asked, looking at the ground. "The truth," said Tyler. "What really happened when we were babies?" Dorothy took a deep breath. After 23 years, someone was asking for the truth. "Did Mrs. Constance tell you I was irresponsible?" "She said you were very young and didn't want the responsibility of 3 children, confirmed Kenneth. Dorothy let out a bitter laugh. "Young I was, 29 years old, irresponsible never, and I didn't want the responsibility." She raised her eyes and looked at each of them. "You were everything I wanted in life." The 3 exchanged glances, confirming what they already suspected. "So what happened?" insisted Brandon gently. Dorothy briefly told the version of events they didn't yet know. She spoke about the promises that it was temporary, about how she was gradually kept away from her own children, about how Mrs. Constance disappeared with them. "She said it was just until I got myself better established," she finished. "I believed her." "My God," murmured Kenneth. "So we were stolen." "Don't use that word," Dorothy said quickly. "You had a good life, education, opportunities, everything I could never have given you." "But we were separated from our mother against her will," insisted Tyler. Dorothy stood up. "The 5 minutes are up. Please leave." "Mom, wait. I am not your mother," shouted Dorothy. "Mothers don't give away their children. Mothers fight to the end. I failed you. I was weak, I was stupid, I was naive. You deserve better mothers than I was." She turned back to her cart with tears in her eyes, leaving the three men bewildered on the bench. That night, Dorothy made a decision. She couldn't keep living that situation. Their presence was destroying the peace it had taken years to build. It was time to disappear again. She gathered her few clothes, some personal items, and the box with the hospital bracelets. In the early hours, she left the studio apartment, leaving a letter for the landlord explaining she needed to travel urgently. She took the first bus leaving Charlotte from the bus station. The destination didn't matter. Anywhere far from the three men who had turned her life upside down. The bus was headed for Greensboro, in the north of North Carolina. Dorothy slept for almost the entire trip, physically and emotionally exhausted. She arrived in the city at 7 on a Monday morning. She had little money, knew no one, and had no plans. But at least she was far from the ghosts of the past. She walked around the downtown area looking for some work opportunity. Greensboro was smaller than Charlotte, but busy enough to offer possibilities for someone willing to work. At a diner near the bus station, she saw a sign, "Cook with experience needed." Dorothy went in and spoke with the owner, Mr. Harold, a 60-year-old man who seemed kind. "I have experience with sandwiches and quick meals," Dorothy explained, "and I really need the work." Mr. Harold hired her on the spot. The pay wasn't much, but it included a small room in the back of the diner where she could live temporarily. "It's just until you can get yourself better organized," he said, not knowing those were exactly the words Dorothy had heard 23 years ago, under completely different circumstances. Dorothy started working that same day. The diner was open from 6 in the morning until 10 at night, serving mainly bus drivers and passengers in transit. It was hard work, but she threw herself into the tasks with an intensity that surprised even Mr. Harold. "You work as if you want to forget something," he commented at the end of the first week. He wasn't wrong. Meanwhile, in Charlotte, Brandon, Kenneth, and Tyler discovered Dorothy had disappeared. They went to the building where she lived and found the landlord, who showed them the letter she had left. "She said she had a family emergency out of town," the man explained. "She paid the rent on time and left the keys. She seemed like a very honest woman." The three brothers gathered at Brandon's apartment to decide what to do. "She ran away from us," said Kenneth, clearly frustrated. "She didn't run away," corrected Tyler. "She's protecting herself. 23 years holding on to that pain alone. And suddenly we show up and force her to relive everything." "But we can't give up now," insisted Brandon. "Not after discovering the truth." "The question is, how do we find her without scaring her even more?" asked Kenneth. Tyler had an idea. "Let's hire another detective, but this time, when we find her, we won't show up unannounced. We'll send a letter first." "A letter saying what?" asked Brandon. "Saying the truth. That we discovered Mrs. Constance lied to us too. That we understand she was deceived. And that we don't want to force anything, we just want the chance to meet our real mother." The idea seemed good to all three. They hired a new detective and, while waiting for news, wrote the letter together. "Dear Mother Dorothy, we know our sudden appearance must have been a huge shock. We also know you left Charlotte to get away from us, and we understand why. We grew up believing our biological mother had abandoned us because she didn't want children. Mrs. Constance always told us that version, but after talking with you, we realized we were deceived too. We understand you were manipulated by a wealthy woman who took advantage of your vulnerability. We understand you signed papers thinking it was temporary, and we understand you spent years looking for us. We don't want to force a relationship. We don't want to obligate you to be our mother if you don't feel ready for it. But we want you to know we don't blame you for anything that happened. We also want you to know that, despite having had an education and opportunities, we always felt an emptiness. We always knew something was missing in our lives. Now we know that something was you. If you want to talk, please write back to us. If you prefer we stay away, we will respect your decision, but please don't disappear completely. We at least want to know if you are okay. With all our love and respect, Brandon, Kenneth, and Tyler." In Greensboro, Dorothy had adapted to the diner's routine. After 6 weeks working for Mr. Harold, she had managed to save enough money to rent a small apartment of her own. "Are you sure you want to leave here?" asked Mr. Harold when she announced the move. "I can lower the rent for the room a little." "It's not a question of money, Mr. Harold. You've been very generous, but I need a space of my own. I understand. A woman like you must have her secrets." He had no idea how right his comments were. Dorothy rented a one-bedroom apartment in a simple but tidy neighborhood. For the first time in 2 months, she felt relatively at peace. The diner routine kept her busy, and Greensboro was far enough from Charlotte for her to feel safe. Dear listener, if you are enjoying the story, please take a moment to leave a like, and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot, as we are just starting out. Now continuing. It was on a Thursday afternoon that the detective hired by the brothers finally located Dorothy. He saw her working at the diner and confirmed her identity through a photo the young men had taken. Instead of approaching Dorothy directly, he followed the instructions he received and found out where she lived. The next day, Dorothy found an envelope under her apartment door. When she saw it was from Charlotte, her first instinct was to throw it away without reading it, but something made her hesitate. It was different handwriting, more delicate, and on the envelope was written only, "To our dear mother." Dorothy sat on the couch and opened the letter with trembling hands. As she read, tears began to fall. They knew. They understood she had been deceived. More importantly, they didn't blame her. She read the letter 3 times before putting it away in the same box where she kept the hospital bracelets. For the first time in 23 years, someone was offering her forgiveness for something she had never forgiven herself for. But still she couldn't answer the letter. How to explain that she had spent over 2 decades feeling like the worst mother in the world? How to explain that she had agreed to give up her own children because she believed they would have a better life? Even knowing she had been deceived, Dorothy still carried enormous guilt. Guilt for having been naive, for having trusted Mrs. Constance, for having signed those papers without seeking legal help. For a week she kept the letter put away. But she couldn't stop thinking about it. The words, "We don't blame you for anything," echoed in her head constantly. It was Mr. Harold who noticed she was different. "You've been more distracted this week," he commented one quieter afternoon. "Did something happen?" Dorothy hesitated. Mr. Harold had been kind to her since day one. Maybe she could confide in someone after keeping everything to herself for so long. "Mr. Harold, can I ask you a personal question?" "Of course, dear." "Do you have children?" "I have 3, 2 girls and a boy, all married, thank God." And if you had been forced to give them up when they were little, do you think they would forgive you?" Mr. Harold stopped cleaning the counter and looked at Dorothy carefully. "Forced how, dear?" Dorothy told the whole story, from the pregnancy to the letter she had received the previous week. Mr. Harold listened to everything in silence, shaking his head in moments of indignation. "That Mrs. Constance was a criminal," he said when Dorothy finished. "She took advantage of a young, vulnerable woman. But I signed the papers, Mr. Harold. No one forced me. Dear, you were deceived. There's a difference between signing something of your own free will and signing because you were tricked. But the result is the same. I gave up my children." Mr. Harold sat down beside her. "Dorothy, I'm going to tell you something. When my oldest son was 15, he ran away from home because we had a fight. He spent 3 months living on the streets, going through hardship. When he came back, I felt like the worst father in the world. I blamed myself for years. But that's different." "Different how?" "My son suffered because of a decision I made too. The difference is I had the chance to make things right. You're having that chance now." "But what if they find out what kind of person I became after losing them? What if they find out about the problems with drinking, about the years I spent on the street?" "What if they find out and don't care?" retorted Mr. Harold. "Dear, they wrote that they don't blame you. That means something." That night, Dorothy sat down to write a reply. She started and restarted several times, tearing up the attempts. How to summarize 23 years of pain in a letter. Finally, she decided to write the simple truth. "Dear children, I received your letter and read it many times. I couldn't stop crying. You say you don't blame me, but I blame myself. I have blamed myself every day for 23 years. I blame myself for having been naive, for having trusted a woman who only wanted to steal my children. But mostly I blame myself for not fighting harder. I should have looked for better lawyers, should have moved heaven and earth to get you back. Instead, I accepted that maybe you really were better off without me. After Mrs. Constance disappeared with you, I got completely lost. I had problems with drinking, lost several jobs, even ended up living on the street. I wasn't someone you could have been proud of. I only managed to rebuild my life at 40. Now I have a simple but dignified life. I work at a diner here in Greensboro and live alone in a small apartment. I don't know if I deserve to have you back in my life. I don't know if I'm a good enough mother for sons who have become such successful men. But if you really want to talk, I would like to know who you've become. With love and much longing, Dorothy, your mother. She sent the letter before she could regret it. The reply came a week later, but this time it wasn't a letter. It was Brandon standing at the door of Mr. Harold's diner. Dorothy almost fainted when she saw him. Mr. Harold had to support her. "Easy now, dear. Take a deep breath." "Mum," said Brandon gently, "can we talk?" Dorothy looked around the diner. There were a few customers watching the scene with curiosity. "Not here," she said quietly. "People are staring." "Then where?" asked Brandon. I live nearby. We can go to my place." She never imagined she would say those words, inviting one of her sons to her home, after 23 years. Mr. Harold offered to run the diner alone for the rest of the day. Dorothy took off her apron and left with Brandon, walking silently through the streets of Greensboro until they reached the building where she lived. "This is it," she said nervously. "It's a simple apartment." "I don't mind that," replied Brandon. They went up to the second floor. Dorothy opened the door and invited her son in. The apartment was indeed very simple, a small living room with a sofa and television, an open-plan kitchen, a bedroom, and a bathroom. But everything was clean and tidy. Would you like some coffee?" offered Dorothy. "Yes, thank you." She prepared the coffee in the open-plan kitchen while Brandon observed the apartment. There were few decorations, but he noticed a small photo on the TV stand. It was an old ultrasound, where 3 small silhouettes could be seen. "You kept this all these years?" he asked, pointing to the photo. Dorothy looked and blushed. "It's the only thing I have from when we were your children," Brandon completed gently. They sat on the small sofa. Dorothy served the coffee with trembling hands. Brandon noticed she was terrified. "Mum, I didn't come here to judge you," he said. "I came to get to know you." "But why just you? Where are your brothers?" "They wanted to come too, but we thought it was better if only one came first, so as not to overwhelm you." Dorothy nodded. That made sense. "How did you find me again?" "The same detective who helped us the first time. But this time I asked him to deliver the letter before telling us where you were." "And how did you know I was telling the truth about Mrs. Constance?" Brandon sighed. "Because some things never added up in her version. She always said our mother was too young and irresponsible, but at the same time she got nervous when we asked for details about you." "Nervous how?" "She'd changed the subject quickly, said it was better not to dwell on the past, and most of all, she never wanted us to look for you." Dorothy sipped her coffee, processing the information. "Is Mrs. Constance still alive?" "She is. Lives in a mansion in Buckhead, in New York. She's 82 and has an enormous fortune. Was she a good mother to you?" The question came out before Dorothy could stop herself. Brandon heard the pain behind it. "She gave us education, opportunities, comfort," he answered honestly. "But no, Mum. She wasn't a good mother. She was cold, controlling. It always felt like we were more of an accomplishment to her than people she truly loved." Dorothy closed her eyes. On one hand, she felt relief knowing that Mrs. Constance had not been a perfect mother. On the other, she felt guilty for feeling relief. "And you? Are you happy? Married? Children?" "Kenneth is a lawyer, married, has a 3-year-old daughter. Tyler is a businessman, engaged. I'm a doctor, still single." "A doctor?" Dorothy broke into an involuntary smile. "I always wanted one of my children to be a doctor." It was the first time she had spoken of them as my children, since they had reunited. Brandon noticed. "Do you still consider us your children?" Dorothy looked at him for a long moment. "You are everything I ever loved most in life, no matter the distance, no matter the time. You were born here," she put her hand on her chest, "and never left." Brandon felt his eyes well up. "Then why did you run from us in Charlotte?" "Because I was afraid. Afraid you would discover what kind of person I am. That I'm not the mother you deserve. Mom, you work honestly, rebuild your life after a terrible trauma, live in a simple but dignified home. I don't see anything there you should be ashamed of." "But you don't know everything, Brandon. You don't know about the years I spent drinking, the jobs I lost, the nights I slept on the street." "And does that change anything?" he asked. "Do you think that I, as a doctor, have never treated patients who had problems with alcohol? Do you think I don't understand that people go through difficult phases when they lose something important?" Dorothy had never thought of it that way. For 23 years, she had carried the guilt and shame as if they were unforgivable crimes. "I don't know how to be a mother to grown men," she confessed. "I don't know what my place is in your lives." "How about we start by figuring it out together?" suggested Brandon. "No rush, no pressure, just getting to know each other." They spent the rest of the afternoon talking. Brandon told her about medical school, about his work at the hospital, about the pediatrics specialization he was pursuing. Dorothy told him about the last few years in Greensboro, about Mr. Harold and the diner, about how she had managed to stabilize her life. When it grew dark, Brandon realized he needed to return to Charlotte. Can I come back to visit you other times?" he asked. "If you want to," Dorothy replied timidly. "I really want to. And Kenneth and Tyler want to get to know you better too." "All three together?" Dorothy looked frightened again. "It doesn't have to be all at once. We can take it slow." At the apartment door there was a moment of hesitation. Brandon wanted to hug his mother, but didn't know if she was ready for that. Dorothy wanted to hug her son, but didn't know if she had the right. She was the one who took the initiative. She timidly extended her arms and said, "May I? May I give you a hug?" Brandon hugged her carefully as if she might break. Dorothy began to cry silently. "Thank you for looking for me," she whispered. "Thank you for not giving up on me." "I would never give up on my mother," he replied. When Brandon left, Dorothy sat on the sofa and cried for hours. But for the first time in 23 years, they weren't just tears of pain. They were tears of relief, of hope, of a possibility she never thought she'd have. Brandon returned the following week, and this time he brought Kenneth. At first, Dorothy was nervous with two sons present at once, but Kenneth was as kind as his older brother. "Mom," he said the first time he saw her. "Can I call you Mom?" "You can call me whatever you feel comfortable with," she replied. "We always wanted to have a real mother," Kenneth confessed. "Mrs. Constance was never affectionate with us. You're how I always imagined a mother should be." 2 weeks later, it was Tyler's turn to visit. He was the most emotional of the three, and cried when he saw Dorothy for the first time. "I remember you," he said. "Not the details, but I remember the smell, the affection. I always felt that was missing in my life." Gradually, the three brothers began to visit Dorothy frequently. She met her sister-in-law and the little granddaughter she didn't know she had. She met Tyler's fiancée. She heard stories about how they had grown up, about the difficulties they faced even with their privileges. "Mrs. Constance never showed affection," Kenneth told her during one of these visits. "We were more like trophies she displayed for her friends. She paid for everything we needed, but never asked about our feelings, our dreams," added Tyler. "When we did something wrong, she would send us to boarding school for weeks." "Are you sure you want to get to know me better?" Dorothy asked one afternoon. "I'm so different from the world you grew up in." "Mother," said Brandon, "you are everything we ever wanted, a person who truly loves us." It was that day that Dorothy made an important decision. She called the three of them to sit down and said, "I want to tell you everything that happened after Mrs. Constance disappeared with you. Everything. The ugly parts, the parts I'm ashamed of. You deserve to know who you're dealing with." And she told them. She talked about the 3 years desperately searching for them, about the depression that consumed her when she realized she had lost her children forever, about the years drinking to forget the pain, about the nights on the street when she had no money for rent. She talked about the lost jobs, about the humiliation of begging, about the times she thought about giving up on living. But she also talked about the support group that helped her stop drinking, about the small jobs that slowly rebuilt her dignity, about the strength she found to start over at 40. When she finished, the three were in tears. "Mother," said Kenneth, "you went through all that because of us." "Not because of you," corrected Dorothy. "Because of Mrs. Constance. You were innocent babies." "But you suffered because you lost us," insisted Tyler. "If we had never existed, if you had never existed, I would never have known the purest love of my life," Dorothy interrupted. "The 9 months of pregnancy and the 8 months I had with you were the best of my existence. The suffering that came after was the price I paid for having known that love." "And now?" asked Brandon. "How do you feel about us now?" Dorothy looked at the 3 men before her. Tall, handsome, well-educated, successful, so different from the simple life she led, yet so similar to the babies she had lost. "Now I feel that God has given me a second chance," she said. "A chance to know the wonderful men my babies have become." It was at that moment that Brandon shared some news with her. "Mother, we talked and decided something. We want you to come back to Charlotte." Dorothy fell silent. "Not to live with us," Kenneth clarified quickly. "We know you need your independence, but we want you to live nearby so we can spend time together as a family." "I have a job here," said Dorothy. "Mr. Harold counts on me." "What if we found you a better job in Charlotte?" suggested Tyler. "Something that paid more, that gave you more dignity. I don't want charity from my children." "It wouldn't be charity," explained Brandon. "It would be a mother allowing her children to help her, like children have always done in normal families." Dorothy needed time to think. The idea of returning to Charlotte frightened her. That's where Mrs. Constance was. That's where the painful memories were. That's where the snack cart she had abandoned when she first found her children was. But it was also where her children lived, where the little granddaughter she barely knew was, where she could truly live with them as a family. "Let me talk to Mr. Harold," she finally said. "He has been so good to me. I can't just leave him without notice." When she told Mr. Harold about her children's proposal, he smiled. "My dear, I always knew one day you would leave here. A woman like you wasn't made to stay in a small town forever." "But the diner, I'll manage. I've been thinking about retiring anyway. You gave me a new energy all these months, but now it's time to follow your heart. Mr. Harold, I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done for me." "No need to thank me at all. Just promise me you'll be happy with these children God has given back to you." Dorothy returned to Charlotte 2 weeks later. Her children helped her with the move and rented a small but comfortable apartment for her in a neighborhood close to downtown. "It's just temporary," explained Kenneth, "until you decide exactly where you want to live." "And what about work?" asked Dorothy. "We had an idea," said Tyler. "Would you like to have your own business?" They had thought about helping her set up a small diner of her own, something bigger than a street cart but not a formal restaurant. Dorothy was moved by the idea, but at the same time worried. That must cost a lot of money. "Mom," said Brandon, "stop being so proud. The 3 of us had a good education, we work hard, we make enough money. We want to invest in our mother's business. But what if it fails? What if I can't pay you back?" "Then we'll fail together," replied Kenneth. "That's what a family does." It was the first time in 23 years that Dorothy felt part of a real family. The diner was set up in 3 months. It was a small but well-located space with 6 tables and a counter. Dorothy took great care with the menu, offering elaborate sandwiches, healthy snacks, and homemade dishes. On opening day, she was nervous but happy. Her 3 sons were there, along with their respective families. Mr. Harold came from Greensboro especially to show his support. Some of her old customers from the snack cart also showed up. "Mom," said Kenneth at the ribbon cutting, "would you like to say a few words?" Dorothy looked at all those people gathered to celebrate her success. 6 months ago, she was a 52-year-old woman who thought she would live alone forever. Now she had a family, her own business, and a future to look forward to. "I don't know how to speak in public," she said, embarrassed. "Just say what's in your heart," encouraged Tyler. Dorothy took a deep breath and said, "Many people ask me if I'm happy about being reunited with my children, and I always answer no, I'm not happy. I am whole. For 23 years, I lived as if half of me was missing. Now I know it was. My children are the half that completes my soul," everyone applauded. Dorothy cut the ribbon and the Fresh Start Diner was officially opened. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. The diner's first few months were a learning experience. Dorothy had to adapt to having employees, dealing with suppliers, managing a business bigger than a simple cart. But her sons helped her in every aspect. Brandon took care of health and hygiene, making sure everything was always in order for the health inspectors. Kenneth helped with the legal and tax side. Tyler assisted with administration and marketing. "You don't have to do this," Dorothy would always say. "You have your own jobs." "Mom," one of them would invariably reply, "this is how families work. Everyone helps everyone." The clientele grew quickly. Dorothy's food was flavorful and made with care. She knew every customer by name, asked about their families, remembered each one's preferences. "The difference from your mother," a customer commented to Kenneth, "is that she cooks with love. You can taste it in the seasoning." It was around that time that something none of them expected happened. Mrs. Constance Wellington appeared at the diner. Dorothy was alone at the counter when she saw the 82-year-old woman enter with difficulty, leaning on an expensive cane. Even with the wrinkles and completely white hair, Dorothy recognized her immediately. Her blood ran cold. For a moment, she thought she might faint. Mrs. Constance approached the counter and stared at her with the same cold eyes from 23 years ago. "So it's true," said the elderly woman in a harsh voice. "You managed to influence my grandsons?" "They are not your grandsons," Dorothy managed to reply. "They are my sons." "Sons?" Mrs. Constance let out a cruel laugh. "You abandoned those children. I'm the one who raised them. I'm the one who educated them. I'm the one who turned 3 helpless babies into successful men." "I did not abandon them. You deceived me. I saved those children from a life of poverty with an irresponsible mother." Dorothy felt the anger rising, but she tried to control herself. She didn't want to cause a scene in her own diner. "Please leave my diner," she said as calmly as she could. "Your diner?" Mrs. Constance looked around with disdain. "You think you achieved this alone? They paid for everything, didn't they? They're still supporting you, just as I always knew would end up happening. You know nothing about my life or about my sons." "I know you're going to destroy them," said Mrs. Constance with malice, "just like you destroyed your own life. Those boys were happy with me, stable. Now they'll have to carry the burden of a worthless mother." That's when Dorothy lost her patience. "Get out of here," she shouted. "Get out before I call the police." The few customers in the diner stopped to look. Mrs. Constance smiled, satisfied at having gotten under Dorothy's skin. "That's exactly what I imagined," she said. "You're still the same uncontrolled, hysterical person. But don't worry, dear. I'm going to talk to my grandsons and make them understand the mistake they're making." She left the diner, leaving Dorothy trembling with anger and fear. That night, Dorothy called Brandon and told him what had happened. "She said she's going to talk to you," Dorothy finished. "She's going to try to convince you to distance yourselves from me." "Mom, that's not going to happen," said Brandon firmly. "You don't understand. Mrs. Constance is very persuasive. That's how she convinced me to give you up. We're not babies anymore, Mom. We're grown men who know the truth." But Dorothy was tormented for the following days, and her worries were confirmed when Kenneth received a call from Mrs. Constance asking to meet. "She wants to talk to me, Brandon and Tyler together," Kenneth told his mother. "She said she has important things to reveal about our past." "Are you going?" asked Dorothy, trying to hide the panic in her voice. "We are," said Kenneth, "but only to make it clear to her that we're not going to distance ourselves from you." "What if she convinces you? What if she shows you something that—" "Mom," Kenneth interrupted, Nothing she can say will change how we feel about you. Nothing. The meeting was scheduled for a Sunday afternoon at Mrs. Constance's apartment in New York. The three brothers went together, determined to definitively end any influence she might try to exert over their lives. Mrs. Constance received them in a room decorated with refinement, but coldly. Even at 82, she maintained a commanding presence. "My dear grandsons," she said as they sat down, "you can't imagine how shocked I was to learn that you found that woman." "We found our mother," corrected Brandon. "Your mother." Mrs. Constance made a disdainful expression. "Let me tell you who this Dorothy Campbell really is." She brought out a folder with documents and photos. "She wasn't just an irresponsible housekeeper. After she gave you up, she became an alcoholic who lived on the streets for years. Look at these photos." The photos showed Dorothy in deplorable conditions, clearly from a time of extreme vulnerability. Unkempt hair, dirty clothes, a lost expression. "These photos were taken 5 years after she abandoned you," lied Mrs. Constance. "Do you think a woman like that is fit to be a mother?" "You hired someone to investigate and photograph our mother?" asked Kenneth, indignant. "I needed to know who you were getting involved with, and I discovered even worse things. She had drug problems, was arrested for vagrancy, even prostituted herself to get money for alcohol." The three brothers exchanged glances. They knew Dorothy had struggled with alcohol, but she hadn't mentioned some of the things Mrs. Constance was claiming. "Even if all of that is true," said Tyler, "it doesn't change the fact that you deceived us when we were children." "I saved you," exclaimed Mrs. Constance. "Look at yourselves. You're a doctor, a lawyer, a businessman. Do you think you would have become this living with her?" "Maybe not," admitted Brandon, "but we would have been happy. We would have had real love." "Love?" Mrs. Constance laughed. "That woman abandoned you at the first sign of trouble. What kind of love is that?" "The kind of love that searches for her children for 3 years straight," replied Kenneth. "The kind of love that carries the pain of separation for 23 years. "You're being naive," insisted Mrs. Constance. "She just wants to take advantage of your success. Why do you think she showed up just now when you're all doing well?" "She didn't show up," said Tyler. "We looked for her, and when we found her, she tried to run away." "Basic psychological manipulation," dismissed Mrs. Constance, "playing the victim to arouse pity." It was then that Brandon stood up. "Enough. We didn't come here to listen to lies about our mother." "Lies?" Mrs. Constance showed more documents. "I have proof of everything I'm saying." "You have proof of the most difficult moments in the life of a woman who had lost everything," corrected Kenneth. "That doesn't prove she's a bad person. It proves she suffered. And that you were cruel enough to hire investigators to spy on a person who was already destroyed," added Tyler. Mrs. Constance realized she was losing control of the situation. "You'll regret this," she said coldly. "When she brings trouble into your lives, when she disappoints you, when she starts drinking again and shames your families, remember I warned you." "If that happens, we'll be there to help her," replied Brandon. "Like sons do for their mothers. And if she can't stay sober, if she goes back to the streets, then we'll take care of her until she can recover again," said Kenneth. "Like a family does." Mrs. Constance finally understood she had definitively lost any influence over the 3 men she considered her grandsons. "Get out of my house," she said bitterly, "and don't ever come back. You chose a tramp over the woman who raised you." "We chose our real mother over the woman who stole us from her," corrected Tyler. They left Mrs. Constance's apartment determined to protect Dorothy from any future attempts at sabotage. On the way back to Charlotte, they discussed what they had discovered. "Some of the things she said about Mom's struggles might be true," said Kenneth. "Does that change anything?" asked Brandon. "Maybe we should talk to her about it," suggested Tyler. "If there are things she hasn't told us, it might be out of shame. Or it might be because it's none of our business," pondered Kenneth. "Everyone has a right to some secrets." They decided not to mention the meeting with Mrs. Constance to Dorothy, but she noticed something had happened. "You all seem worried," she commented during a visit to the diner. "Mrs. Constance talked to you, didn't she?" "How do you know?" asked Brandon, surprised. "Because I know her, and because you've been looking at me differently since yesterday." She told us something, began Kenneth hesitantly. About my years on the street? Dorothy interrupted him. About the problems with drinking? About the things I did to survive? The three fell silent. She showed pictures, didn't she? Continued Dorothy. Pictures from when I was at rock bottom. Mom, began Tyler. Do you want to know the whole truth? Asked Dorothy. Do you really want to know what happened during the darkest years of my life? She closed the diner early that day and took them home. They sat in the small living room, and Dorothy told them everything. Absolutely everything. She talked about the 3 years searching for her children when she still had hope of getting them back. About the lawyer who took her money and did nothing. About the dozens of homes where she went looking for work and was rejected because she seemed unstable. She talked about the first time she drank to forget the pain. About how alcohol became the only thing that let her sleep without nightmares. About how she lost several jobs for showing up drunk. She told them about the 6 months she spent living on the street when she couldn't hold any job anymore. About the cold nights sleeping in doorways. About the times she had to accept money from men in exchange for company. I'm not proud of any of this, she said, with tears in her eyes, but they were the only options I had to not give up on living completely. Mom, murmured Kenneth. You have a right to know who I really am, continued Dorothy. If you want to distance yourselves after knowing the truth, I'll understand. Why do you think we'd want to distance ourselves? Asked Brandon. Because you are upstanding people. Doctor, lawyer, businessman. You don't match with a mother who was once a desperate woman who lost everything she loved, completed Tyler. That doesn't shame us, Mom. It makes us admire you even more. How so? Because you survived, explained Kenneth. Because you went through hell and managed to come out. Because at 40, you found the strength to start over from scratch. And because now, at 52, you're building a new life with us, added Brandon. Dorothy looked at her 3 sons. Are you sure you don't mind my past? Mom, said Tyler, your past is part of who you are today, and we love who you are today. Mrs. Constance said I would shame you, that I would bring trouble to your families. Mrs. Constance told many lies for many years, replied Brandon. Why would we believe her now? That night, Dorothy felt truly free for the first time in 23 years. There were no more secrets between her and her children, no more shame to carry alone. In the months that followed, the family grew even stronger. Dorothy became a present grandmother for Kenneth's daughter, who affectionately called her Grandma Co. She actively participated in the preparations for Tyler's wedding, and she supported Brandon when he decided to specialize in neonatal pediatrics. It's funny, Brandon commented in a conversation. I chose to care for premature babies, as if I were trying to save children who go through the same vulnerability we went through. Maybe that's exactly it, replied Dorothy. Maybe each life you save is a way to heal our own story. The diner was thriving. Dorothy had hired 2 employees and was thinking about expanding the business. Her sons constantly suggested it, but she insisted on growing at her own pace. I don't want to become dependent on you, she always explained. I want to earn my success. Mom, you already deserve all the good that's happening, one of them would invariably say. It was on a Saturday morning, almost a year after the reunion, that Dorothy received an unexpected call. Dorothy Campbell? Asked an unknown male voice. Yes, speaking. My name is Dr. Robert Harrison. I'm a geriatrician, and I'm caring for a patient who asked to speak with you urgently. Which patient? Mrs. Constance Wellington. She's hospitalized here and insists she needs to speak with you before it's too late. Dorothy almost hung up the phone. Why would Mrs. Constance want to talk to her, and why should she heed this request? Doctor, I have nothing to say to that woman. I understand, but she's very weak. She has only a few days left and keeps repeating your name. As a doctor, I'm concerned she won't be able to die in peace if she doesn't resolve this matter. Dorothy thought for a few minutes. Mrs. Constance was at the end of her life. The woman who had destroyed her life needed her. Which hospital is she at? Dorothy told her sons about the call. They were unanimous. Don't go, said Brandon. That woman has already done you enough harm. She must be trying some last-minute manipulation. agreed Kenneth. Let her die with her own conscience, Tyler said harshly. But something inside Dorothy told her she needed to go. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was a need for closure. Or maybe it was simply compassion for a dying old woman. I'm going, she decided. Alone. Mom, that's crazy. Maybe it is. But I need to hear what she has to say. I need to close this cycle, once and for all. The hospital was in New York. Dorothy took a bus the next morning and arrived at Mrs. Constance's room in the mid-afternoon. The woman who had terrorized her life for decades was unrecognizable, extremely thin, hooked up to machines, breathing with difficulty, but her eyes still had that cold, calculating glint. You came, said Mrs. Constance in a weak voice. The doctor said you wanted to speak with me. Sit there, requested Mrs. Constance, pointing to a chair near the bed. Please. Dorothy sat, keeping her distance. Why did you call me? Mrs. Constance breathed with difficulty before answering, because I'll be judged soon, and I don't want to carry some burdens on my conscience. What burdens? What I did to you. To the boys. To all of us. Dorothy remained silent, waiting. When you showed up at my house pregnant with triplets, I saw an opportunity I had waited for my entire life. An opportunity for what? To be a mother. I could never get pregnant, Dorothy. I spent my whole life wanting children and never had any. When I saw you there, young, pregnant with 3 babies, I knew that was my chance. Dorothy felt a chill in her stomach. Mrs. Constance was confessing she had planned to steal her children from the start. It was all a lie from the beginning. From the beginning, the promises that it was temporary, that you could visit them, that I was just helping, all lies. But why? Why didn't you adopt children legally? Mrs. Constance gave a bitter laugh. Because I was over 50. No institution would give me 3 babies to adopt. And I wanted babies, Dorothy. I wanted to see them grow from the start. So you destroyed my life to fulfill your dream. I convinced myself I was doing what was best for everyone. You were young, poor, alone. I had money, education, resources. It seemed logical. And then, when I tried to get them back, I hired lawyers to ensure you never could. I paid investigators to know your location and sabotage your attempts to stabilize yourself. Whenever you got a better job, I made sure negative information about you reached the employers. Dorothy felt a rage growing inside her. You sabotaged my life on purpose for years. I protected my grandchildren from an unstable mother. Unstable? I became unstable because you stole my children. Dorothy stood up, trembling with anger. Mrs. Constance continued, I know it was cruel. That's why I'm telling you the truth now. Why now? Why decide to have a conscience only at the hour of loss? Because I discovered something about the boys that changed everything for me. What? Mrs. Constance took a deep breath. They never truly loved me. They never felt for me the love they felt for you in just a few months of being together. Dorothy sat down again, surprised. For years I convinced myself I was a wonderful mother to them. But when they found you, I saw in their eyes a happiness I was never able to awaken. And what does that change? It changes that I realized I stole something that wasn't mine and could never truly make mine. They were always your children, Dorothy, from the first day until today. Dorothy looked at the dying woman in the bed. 23 years of hatred began to dissolve, replaced by a strange mix of pity and understanding. Are you telling me this to ask for forgiveness? I'm telling you because you deserve to know the full truth, and because yes, I would like your forgiveness. Why? What will my forgiveness change for you now? Perhaps nothing, but I would like to die knowing that at least I tried to fix a small part of the harm I caused. Dorothy remained silent for several minutes. The anger was giving way to something more complex. Mrs. Constance had been cruel, manipulative, selfish, but she had also been a desperately lonely woman who made terrible decisions trying to fill a void in her own life. I don't know if I can forgive you, said Dorothy finally. 23 years of pain aren't erased by a deathbed confession. I understand, but I can understand why you did what you did. It doesn't justify it, but it explains it. Thank you. And the boys? Do you want to talk to them too? Mrs. Constance shook her head. They've already said everything they needed to say, and I have no right to bother them at the time of my departure. Dorothy stood up to leave. Mrs. Constance? Yes? Despite everything, thank you for taking good care of them. They became wonderful men. They became wonderful men because they always had the character of their true mother. Dorothy left the hospital with confused feelings. On the bus back to Charlotte, she processed the entire conversation. Mrs. Constance had confirmed her worst suspicions, but had also given explanations that, in a way, freed her from the remaining guilt. She had been the victim of an elaborate plan from the start. She hadn't been naive or stupid. She had been deliberately deceived by a desperate woman who used every possible resource to achieve her goals. When she got home, Dorothy called Brandon and told him about the conversation. "So it was all premeditated after all," he said after hearing the account. "From day one, and she actively sabotaged my life for years to make sure I never got you back." "How do you feel knowing this?" Dorothy thought before answering. "Relieved in a way. For 23 years I blamed myself for being stupid enough to believe her. Now I know it wasn't stupidity, it was a well-crafted scheme." "And what about forgiveness? Did you forgive her?" "I still don't know, but I'm trying." Mrs. Constance passed away 3 days later. Dorothy found out through the newspaper, which published a small note about the loss of a respected philanthropist from New York. She did not attend the funeral, but lit a candle at the church near the diner. "Why did you light a candle for her?" asked Kenneth when he heard. "Because despite everything she raised my children when I couldn't. That deserves some recognition." With the loss of Mrs. Constance, Dorothy felt that a chapter of her life had finally closed. There were no more threats, no more ghosts from the past. It was time to look completely forward. In the following months, the family grew even closer. Dorothy moved to a larger apartment where she could comfortably host her children and grandchildren. The diner grew, and she opened a second location. On the 2-year anniversary of their reunion, they organized a special party. Dorothy looked around the table where Brandon, Kenneth, Tyler, their respective wives, the grandchildren, and even Mr. Harold, who had come from Greensboro especially for the occasion, were gathered. "Mom," said Brandon, raising a toast, "thank you for teaching us that it's never too late for a fresh start." "Thank you for surviving the worst moments so we could be here today," added Kenneth. "And thank you for showing us that a mother's love is indestructible," finished Tyler. Dorothy stood up with tears in her eyes. "No, my children, thank you for not giving up on looking for me, for seeing beyond the shame and fear I carried, for giving me the chance to be your mother again." Mr. Harold, moved, commented, "It's beautiful to see a family that found each other again. You are proof that love always finds a way." "It's true," agreed Dorothy. 23 years of separation couldn't erase what I felt for you. And apparently, they couldn't erase what you felt for me." "They never could," said Brandon. "Some bonds aren't broken by time or distance." The party continued late into the night. When everyone had left, Dorothy stayed alone, tidying up the house. She took the old box where she kept the hospital bracelets and added some photos from the party they had taken that night. 23 years ago, that box held only painful memories of what she had lost. Now, it also held proof that some miracles really do happen in real life. Dorothy put the box back in its place and went to sleep. For the first time in decades, she had no nightmares of babies crying. She dreamed of the laughter of a reunited family and woke up smiling. The story could have ended there, but life had a few more surprises in store for Dorothy. 6 months after the anniversary party, Kenneth received an unexpected call. It was from a lawyer in New York, informing him that Mrs. Constance had left a will mentioning Dorothy and the 3 brothers. "A will?" asked Dorothy, when Kenneth shared the news. "What could she have left for us?" "We'll only know by going to New York for the reading of the document." "I don't want anything from her," said Dorothy immediately. "Absolutely nothing." "Mum, at least let's hear what it is," suggested Brandon. "Then you can decide whether or not to accept it." Reluctantly, Dorothy agreed to accompany them to New York for the reading of the will. The law office was elegant and formal. Besides Dorothy and her sons, there were a few other beneficiaries whom Dorothy did not know. The lawyer began by reading the general provisions: apartments for former employees, donations to charitable institutions, sums for distant relatives. And finally, he said, "For Dorothy Campbell and her sons Brandon, Kenneth, and Tyler Wellington, I leave." Dorothy held her breath. The Constance Wellington Foundation for Family Reunification, in the amount of $2 million, with the following condition: that it be used specifically to help mothers who lost children through manipulation or deceit to reunite with their families. Dorothy was stunned. Mrs. Constance had left a fortune to create a foundation that would do the exact opposite of what she had done. "There's more," the lawyer continued. "There is an attached letter addressed specifically to Mrs. Dorothy." He handed her the envelope. Dorothy opened it with trembling hands and read, "Dorothy, if you are reading this, it means I have already passed on and you have decided to heed my final wishes. For years I convinced myself I had done the right thing by stealing your children. But when I saw them happy with you, I realized I had destroyed far more than I ever imagined. I cannot undo the harm I caused, but I can try to prevent other women from going through what you went through. The foundation should be managed by you and your children. Use the money to hire lawyers, investigators, and social workers who help families separated by deceit or manipulation. Do what I did not do. Protect true family bonds instead of destroying them. This is my attempt to find some purpose in the harm I caused. I hope you will accept. Constance Wellington." Dorothy finished reading the letter in silence. Her 3 sons waited anxiously for her reaction. "What do you think?" Tyler finally asked. I think it's the only thing she could have done to begin fixing the damage she caused." "So you will accept managing the foundation?" Dorothy thought for a few minutes. "I will accept, but on one condition. I want to change the name. I don't want it to be called the Constance Wellington Foundation." "What name do you suggest?" Kenneth asked. "Fresh Start Foundation, just like the name of the diner, because that's what this is about. Giving families a second chance to start over together." The lawyer confirmed the name could be changed, and Dorothy officially accepted the inheritance. In the following months, the Fresh Start Foundation began its work. Dorothy hired a team of lawyers specializing in family law, social workers, and investigators. The first case that came to them was a woman whose ex-husband had kidnapped the children and disappeared. The second was a grandmother trying to regain grandchildren who had been given up for adoption illegally by her daughter-in-law. "It's amazing how many families are separated under dubious circumstances," Dorothy remarked during a team meeting. "And it's amazing how you've turned your own pain into strength to help others," replied the coordinating social worker. In 2 years of operation, the Fresh Start Foundation had already reunited 15 families. Dorothy participated personally in each case, offering emotional support to the mothers going through the same thing she had. "The difference is that now they have help," she would always say. "I went through 23 years alone. They won't have to." Dorothy's story began to be known through the foundation. Journalists became interested in the case, and she was interviewed several times, always focusing on the social work and not on her own tragedy. "I don't want to be remembered as the woman who lost her children," she said in an interview for a women's magazine. "I want to be remembered as the woman who found them again and used that experience to help other families." 3 years after the reunion, Dorothy was at the peak of her life. She had a united family, prosperous businesses, and social work that gave meaning to her past experiences. It was on a Sunday morning during a family lunch that Tyler made a special announcement. "Mom, Ashley and I have some news." "Did you set a wedding date?" Dorothy asked. "Better than that, we're expecting a baby." Dorothy nearly dropped the glass she was holding. She would be a grandmother again, but this time she would be there from the start. "A baby!" she exclaimed, standing up to hug her son and daughter-in-law. "My God, a baby." "And we wanted to ask you something," said Ashley timidly. "We wanted you to be the godmother." Dorothy began to cry. "Godmother? Me?" "You are the most important person in our lives after the 2 of us," explained Tyler. "And we want our son to grow up knowing his grandmother's story of overcoming." 6 months later, Dorothy was holding her grandson Gabriel in her arms, the same name as the boy from the story that inspired this narrative. She looked at the baby's little face and saw traces of herself, traces of her sons, traces of the family she had lost and recovered. "Welcome to the family, my prince," she whispered. "You are going to grow up surrounded by real love." Brandon, Kenneth, and Tyler watched their mother with the new grandson. It was a moment of wholeness that none of them had imagined possible a few years ago. "Mom," said Kenneth, "do you think it was all destined to end like this?" Dorothy looked at him. "I don't know if it was destined, but I know every tear, every sleepless night, every day of pain was worth it. It was worth it because it brought me here, to you, to this moment. You don't regret anything. I regret being naive with Mrs. Constance, but I don't regret fighting to survive. I don't regret waiting for you, even when I thought it was impossible, and most of all, I don't regret saying yes when you came looking for me." Brandon was moved. "Thank you for saying yes, Mom. Thank you for accepting our family back. Thank you for not giving up on us," added Kenneth. "And thank you for teaching us what unconditional love is," finished Tyler. Dorothy rocked her grandson in her arms and looked around the room. There were her 3 sons, her daughters-in-law, her grandchildren, in a house she had built with her own work, after starting life over. "You know something?" she said. "I used to think my life had ended when I lost you. Today I understand it was only being postponed." "Postponed for what?" asked Tyler. "To truly begin. Everything I lived through until I was 52 was just preparation for this phase, the phase where I am truly happy." Baby Gabriel stirred in her arms and opened his little eyes for the first time, looking directly at her. Dorothy smiled. "Hello, my love. Your grandma has many stories to tell you, stories about how love always finds a way back home." 5 years after the reunion, Dorothy was organizing a special party, Gabriel's first birthday and the 5th anniversary of the Fresh Start Foundation. The party took place in the backyard of the new house she had bought, large enough to host the entire extended family, which now also included some of the foundation's beneficiaries who had become close friends. "Mom," said Brandon during the party, "have you ever stopped to count how many people have been impacted by your story?" Dorothy looked around. There were her employees from the diner, families reunited by the foundation, Mr. Harold with his family, neighbors who had become friends, and of course her 3 sons with their families. "It's not the people who were impacted by my story," she corrected. "It's the people who are part of my story. Each one of them helped make me who I am today." "And who are you today?" asked Kenneth. Dorothy picked up Gabriel and looked at all those people gathered celebrating life, family, and second chances. "Today I am a complete woman, a mother who was lucky enough to lose her sons, only to get them back as wonderful men. A grandmother who can be there from day one, an entrepreneur who builds businesses with her own hands, and most of all, a person who learned that it's never too late to start over." "Would you change anything if you could go back in time?" asked Tyler. Dorothy thought for a moment. "I would change only one thing. I would have sought legal help sooner when Mrs. Constance began to push me away from you all. But paradoxically, if I hadn't gone through everything I went through, perhaps I wouldn't have the strength and wisdom I have today to help other families. So was it all necessary? I don't know if it was necessary, but it was transformative. And now that it's in the past, I can say it was the path that brought me here." Gabriel babbled something unintelligible, and Dorothy laughed. "Your grandson agrees with you," joked Ashley. "He knows his grandma is wise," said Dorothy, kissing the baby's little head. When the party ended and everyone had left, Dorothy stayed alone tidying the house. It was a routine she loved, gathering the traces of happy moments, organizing memories in her mind while organizing objects in the house. She went to the room where she kept her most precious memories. The old box was now on a beautiful shelf, surrounded by photos of the reunited family. Dorothy opened it and looked at the 3 hospital bracelets that had been there alone for so many years. Now they shared space with graduation photos, weddings, births, birthday parties, and everyday moments of a family that had found each other again. "Thank you," she said softly, not knowing exactly to whom she was speaking. Perhaps to God, perhaps to fate, perhaps to the inner strength that had kept her alive in the most difficult moments. Thank you for allowing me to get here. She closed the box and went to sleep. The next day would be Monday, the day to reopen the diner after the weekend, the day to receive new cases at the foundation, the day to continue building the life that had taken 5 decades to truly begin. Dorothy turned off the lights and lay down with a smile on her face. At 57, she had finally found her place in the world. It was exactly where it should have always been. At home, with her family, making a difference in the lives of others. End of story. Now tell us what you thought of Dorothy and her children's story. Do you believe she made the right decisions in accepting her children back and forgiving Mrs. Constance? Share your opinion in the comments. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to leave your like and especially subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other emotional stories like this one.